So the game that I decided to present as my board game presentation is the game of Monopoly. I found this game to be interesting because I think it incorporates a certain degree of both luck and skill, but I think it is primarily skill that allows the players to win the game. So the instructions are fairly simple. You have to have between 2 and 8 players. Each player is given a specific amount of money to start off with, and the goal of the game is that players travel around the board buying properties as well as engaging in other acts of gameplay. In addition to the main properties, there are utilities and railroad stations, which have specific things associated with them separate than the original properties. The players also have the ability to make or lose money or be sent to jail through the community chest and chance cards, as well as on free parking. They have the ability to gain the money that has been put in free parking. The winner of the game is the person who manages to complete the game by bankrupting other players and is not bankrupt themselves. So, what is the object of the game? From the Hasbro instructions, the object of the game is to become the wealthiest player through buying, renting, and selling property. Another object is ensuring that the player does not become bankrupt through buying too many properties or being unable to afford another character's rent cost, among other things that cost money during the game. There are many different strategies that one can follow in order to achieve this object. In addition to this, I would argue that the goal is not necessarily to not become bankrupt yourself, but in addition to this, not to ensure that other players do become bankrupt. The strategies of Monopoly. What is interesting about Monopoly is that there is not one strategy that is guaranteed to make you win the game. Unlike other games, there is a number of different ways that a person is able to win. Ultimately, the end result is the same, but how a person gets there can be different. One strategy a person can take is by buying many properties and then working towards building up as many houses as possible. Another strategy a person can take is attempting to buy the properties that another person needs in order to create a monopoly. This gives the person more chances to make trades with other players, which can be an important part of the game because trades ensure that a person is able to build more monopolies, thus adding houses and hotels onto their properties. And in addition to this, if a person has all of the colors of one specific, all of the properties within a specific color grouping, they are their rent or the money that they make off of the properties increases. Another strategy is attempt to buy all of the high value properties that have the highest rent. Some people go for the strategy of buying high value properties, and others go for the strategy of having just more properties overall. Another strategy that a person could use is buying things like railroads alongside other properties. But ultimately, the most important component of any strategy within Monopoly is that the person has to ensure that they are not overspending the money that they have, while also making sure to buy enough properties that they are able to receive rent from. Thus, if you buy a bunch of properties but don't have enough money to pay for everything else, you could go bankrupt. But also later in the game, if you've discovered that you haven't bought any properties at all, pretty much, you run the risk of not having enough income to continue to pay for things. So at the beginning of the game, it might be helpful to not buy a bunch of properties and extra stuff, but towards the end of the game, when other players have built up monopolies and stuff, it may not be to the person's benefit. Investing in properties is very important, but in addition to this, it is important to be able to have enough money to be able to afford to pay rent on others' properties. Surrounding statistics, there's a large component of both skill and luck that factors into a game of Monopoly. In addition to this, there's also a certain level of statistics involving surrounding what square is most likely to be landed on. I did a little bit of research, and there actually is a certain level of statistics that involve, there actually is a most landed on property in Monopoly, and listed here is some of the statistics that the Mind Your Decisions blog went into detail surrounding. One more surrounding the gameplay, one thing that is interesting in regards to the way that Monopoly is played and won is there are multiple different outcomes that can cause a player to go bankrupt and ensure another player's victory. This means essentially that it is not just the person winning that ensures the end of the game, it is ultimately the person losing, because it is not that the winner gets to a certain place of wealth in order to win. It is ultimately the decisions of the loser that establish the fate of the game, because the ending of the game is not the person having a certain amount of money, it is actually the other characters going bankrupt, or the other player, not character, going bankrupt is the one who establishes the winner. So how to win? Some examples of how to win is a player could go bankrupt when attempting to pay rent to another player. This could basically mean that they do not have enough money left in their bank in order to pay rent, and or they have not bought enough properties over the course of the game. A player lands on a chance/community chest card that requires payment that a player does not have. For example, if the card requires a player to pay taxes on their available properties, houses, hotels that they have bought, and they don't have enough money to pay for those taxes, the person could wind up going bankrupt and the other person left could win. The revenue that the player is bringing in no longer is enough to pay for different aspects of gameplay. So that could include the aforementioned things surrounding not having enough money to pay for different aspects of gameplay. And in addition to this, not being able to afford things such as rent. There is also other possible outcomes as well. The gameplay is kind of particular to every individual game. For example, things like trading and the ways in which people make money may look different throughout the game. For example, somebody could make a trade for a different card and in addition give the person money, or they could trade for other cards such as get out of jail free cards or railroads. There are ultimately many different ways that a person could win, and also, in addition to this, many different ways that a person can make money in the game. So the real question is Monopoly a game of luck, chance, or strategy? I would argue that it is a combination of both that allows the person to win at the game of Monopoly. Monopoly is a game that incorporates a certain degree of both luck and chance in order to win. It is not entirely based upon a person's skill in order to win because of certain components of the game that are based around chance. So while there is a certain degree of skill surrounding what properties a person buys, how much money they spend on properties, whether they buy a bunch of properties early on in the game, whether they buy a bunch of high-cost properties or they choose to stick to many smaller properties, ultimately there is a element of chance surrounding it. So while the choice of what property someone should buy is up to them, what squares on the board a person lands on is ultimately a component of pure chance. And while there is a component of luck that has to be factored in, overall the game is a game of strategy and skill as to what decision a person makes and who the winner is. So ultimately, while there is a degree of luck involved, I would argue that there is a degree of luck in any game that a person can play, but ultimately it is what skills the person uses in order to win the game that matters. So these are my sources. I used the rules directly from Monopoly, as well as a reference towards a blog that went through the statistical analysis of what squares a person is most likely to land on during the course of a Monopoly game.